Hi and welcome. Thank you for joining us. Really appreciate those which can join us today. If not, you can always see the recorded version at a later time. Today's session is PoE testing with the SignalTEK QT Pro. This is an amazing tester with a lot of capabilities. I'd like to unlock some of the other amazing capabilities we've got, especially when it comes to PoE testing. So I've got my tech over there. We're going to bring on screen some of the things about PoE in a moment, but let's get started. So once again, it's a welcome to those which have joined our seminars before. How it would work is we're going to run through it. It's going to be 25 minutes or so for this session, and we're going to cover, most importantly, items about PoE, which we kind of already know. Power over Ethernet typically runs devices, and as we add more devices onto a network system, we may affect our power budget. So how to know that? Let's find out soon. Let's get started. And of course, any questions, please hold them, think about them along our journey today, and we'll be there at the end. We can answer all those questions, or if not, just give me your email details and we'll get back to you in the future. So on to power over Ethernet. For those which are unfamiliar with power over Ethernet, it's pretty much almost a pseudo standard for all modern networks. We typically see power over Ethernet is very simply the utilization of an existing data cable, so a existing data cable sending both power and data, which most popular would be security cameras and Wi-Fi systems. We've also got IP phones there, but we're seeing a transition of IP phones moving to more integrated desktops. So typically, power over Ethernet is the most fundamental communication system, supports the most fundamental network systems that we use today and expect today. So you can imagine, the more devices we add, the more chance we've got of going over our budget. When we look at power over Ethernet deployment, it hasn't just happened. Sometimes we're just adding it to a legacy system. So it's typically deployed in two ways. You might have an existing switch, and you may add an injector, such as a little box like this, or you might have an integrated power over Ethernet and data switch integrated together, typically for Wi-Fi systems. So cameras, IP cameras, controlling devices, we would use injectors, and cameras, Wi-Fi systems, we would have typically an integrated system. So I hope that makes sense. And we can see later the theme in this is, should you exceed your budget, you may choose to add a device later. It's one of the ideas. So I hope that makes sense. So talking about power over Ethernet, we've probably heard this term and think, wow, it's kind of boring. But believe it or not, it's been in development for about 15 years now, because it's such, it provides such great advantages to reducing the amount of wiring and adding more and more to our networks. So you sort of can hear the theme here, that as we add more and more, we start exceeding our budgets. So just to let you know, over the last 15 years, we've reached 218, where 802.3bt power over Ethernet standard was launched. And the idea is we're looking at a combination of, or the addition of, typically deploying PoE across 2 pairs and adding the option to power over 4 pairs. So this 802.3bt standard looks at using power across the 4 pairs. That's changed a lot of things, but now we can add a little bit more in power across a link up to 90 watts. I'm just going to bring that on screen now. And the key here, I'm just wondering if I can talk with my tech as well. So I've got Lee over there, my super tech. Do you think we can bring that up behind me? Fantastic. So this is the standard behind me. It's quite complicated. There is a range of different elements which we would look at, classes 0 to 8, and various performance characteristics of whether you're near to the switch or whether you're end of the switch. Wow, there's so much to know. So again, I'm just pointing to the standard here. So the idea is we've put that standard in the SignalTEK QT Pro, and we're going to make it easier for you. Okay. We're also going to talk about some of this as we walk through. So again, when you're working with a legacy system or an active network right now, this tester is able to unlock all of these standards and test against them. Okay, so let's move on to the next thing. Typically, buildings look like kind of this now, most modern network buildings. So in many ways, we've got a lot of different things hanging off a building. So I mentioned Wi-Fi. That's the standard and most expected device. And typically we are deploying a data and powered system over that one Ethernet cable. So we'd see that camera systems, maybe even door controls. So the story here is that that's kind of straightforward and common, and typically they're actually low power devices. They're 25 watt, 30 watt devices. They're typically fine. And most people working with those systems don't have a problem until you add so many, you exceed the budget. I've got this colored one here, just sort of just noting here that we're starting to see the 4-pair Ethernet deployed with information boards or display boards or AV boards. So information or kiosk boards are becoming a little bit more popular in buildings, and that's where we're seeing 90 watt deployed. So now we've got to think, do we need to add an extra bit of power to our system? Where do we need to add that power? Should we add these extra items? Typically our infrastructure, we would like and hope that it's already been certified and it can carry 90 watt, but what happens when it's live or a legacy system? So once again, our systems need to be ready to work up to 90 watt. So let's think about that. Additionally, we're seeing that we're starting to connect devices outside of our building. So something about PoE that's important for us to talk about is as you come out of the building and start adding things like high metallized posts to hang cameras on, or even Wi-Fi systems, you may find that heat, depending on where you are in the world, where you are in the region, heat or external elements will affect the performance of that cabling system. So once again, a live system needs to think about its power budget. So I'm just summarizing that adding lots of products to a device will take the budget or utilize some of that budget. And that budget is typically an aggregate of whatever that device is, okay? The most important thing that we are not aware of is that data cabling performance is typically standardized against 20 degrees. Once we start going further than that, we start reducing our performance. And of course, as our temperature goes up, we need to reduce our performance as well. So do think about those elements. So a load test is very, very important, once again, when you're measuring PoE. So just be aware of it. On this case, I've got an example that 90 watts would be affected or limited at 40-degree heat as low as 65 meters. So it's just a conversation piece for you to be aware of. We're not covering that today, but you just need to know that heat does affect PoE. Typically, we're working in environments like this. The commercial office, well, we expect our Wi-Fi to be dependable, reliable, and always work. In fact, the interesting thing about Wi-Fi is it needs to be connected. So the product connecting to the Wi-Fi is adding the power or delivering the power. So Wi-Fi is a bit of a hidden secret there, that Wi-Fi isn't cableless, it's actually cabled. Okay, so once again, we've got to make sure that our Wi-Fi infrastructure is cabled properly and has good PoE delivery. So just be aware of that. Okay, I'll also note that typically IT managers work with laptops. And when they're working with laptops, they have this challenge of how to measure all these items. So once again, this is where the amazing SignalTEK QT Pro can do all of these things for you. Right, okay, so we're almost there. Before we get to our test, we're just going to summarize. So modern PoE systems typically need a power budget. I talked about budget a few times, and I wasn't going to go into the budget details, but think about it. We need to say, if we're going to add all these products, all these items to our network, we would need to consider a budget. So it needs to be budget. We need to consider our pathways. If we're sending things through metal conduits, because it'd be affected by temperature and heat. There's a new test as well when you do certification, which is called DCRU. That would be ideal if you could test it to that as well for PoE load balance. But I understand there's a lot of legacy systems out there which have not been tested. So we need to consider what we do now when it's live. And of course, even if you've done all of that, what would you do to manage it and maintain it when it's live? And this is where SignalTEK Qt Pro really takes on all those challenges and helps us work. So the most important thing is working with PoE is being aware of these combinations of first verification against a class. The next part is a load test. So if I can just ask Lee, can you just bring up that picture again? So I'm just going to bring up this picture. So we're thinking about all these elements behind me. There is a lot of them. How about we do a load test against S class? That's most important. After we've done a load test, what we would like to do is just check if we're unsure of our budget, if we don't know that, if it hasn't been designed that way, and it's very possible it may not have been designed, we could look at some of these elements and do an extra load test. In other words, see how much more we can get from our PoE system. So let's move across to that now. I'm going to put the SignalTEK Qt Pro on screen, and let's do a test. So I'm just going to bring my Qt Pro up. So on screen now is I'm just using the VNC. So SignalTEK Qt Pro has got a lot of capabilities. It's got Teams Viewer, live Teams Viewer. It's also got a VNC capability. So I'm just using that to display this on screen right now. And you'll just notice this has amazing capabilities from cable qualification, copper network diagnostic, switch information, fiber tracing with a VFL, fiber switch information, Wi-Fi channel management, and discovery, AP discovery. This product truly can cover so much. But in this case, we're just going to focus on the elements for PoE in this tester. I mentioned before that when we're doing a test, we need to think about the length. So let's start with just checking a length verification. So I'm just going to go to copper and engage the copper test. Okay. And using a remote, we can also see without adding our remote, we've got a length here. Once I add the remote, give it a moment, we can check whether we have a shield connected or not. We can also use that to trace, but we know we've got a length. The additional thing we can also do, and I'm just going to press this button down here, is we can run a qualification test across that link. So we can see what can we get, what speeds can we get across this. You can see 2.55 and 10G capable across that link, which is really helpful. So now onto PoE. I can just leave that now. I'm just going to clear those results and go back to the home screen. So I'm back at the home screen. So I've done a qualification test quite quickly. We could look at network diagnostics. So I'm just going to disconnect this and add into our switch. Let's just have a look. So this is almost like an unknown, and excuse me as I lean over here. And one of the things we can do, just give it a moment as we go into our network diagnostics, we can start checking what are we connected to. So in this case, this is not connected to outside. We've just got a standard switch here with a bit of information, and it's going to start going through the process of saying, what speed can I get? Can I see PoE? What speeds? And can I see anything to the outside world? How it works, and Lee, can I ask you now to bring up our image again of all these detailed standards. So this is the 802.3 BT standard, and at the top of it we've got pretty much the items which cover the 2-pair origins, and then the new addition at the bottom, which is 4-pair. So with 4-pair, the interesting thing is it will always start at the highest point. Can I get 90 watt? And it starts stepping down. So it's going to start classifying from one end to the other and stepping down as it goes through each element. This will take a little bit of time, so do be patient, because the whole point of sharing our session today is that PoE is quite complex now. You can have any types of devices on there. There is a lot of different devices. We're going to try and classify all of them for you. Okay, so in this case, we're almost there. And it looks like we have been heating this poor fellow up. And we're at class 7. So whilst we're doing that, we are going to go into the settings, and I'd like to show you in settings, there is a load test as well. So in the load test settings, so that was the classification, we can test against the standards. I'm just going to press on this here, okay? And we can see the standards here. I'm just going to bring up each item there in detail, should you wish to know about those various levels. And if you're working with a live network, you also have these other diagnostic options where you can ping to a device. I like traceroute because you can also see the various hops and times as you go out, or NetScan to capture a network group. But once again, we're focusing on PoE. So that is in the settings. I'm just going to tick that to say I want to do that test. And during that time, if you noticed, I just stepped out rather than seeing you wait, I just showed you the settings. You could select your settings, and we've now settled on class 6. So in many ways, this device is kind of just happy to deliver class 6, verified, okay? Let's do the load test now. Let's see that in action. So I'm just going to press load test. I can go into it by hitting the test. And here it is here. And this is where this range comes up. So Lee, if I could just ask if you can just bring that symbol up again. Okay, so once again, the standards are here, but you can now see you've got the minimum range and maximum range within that class setting. So that means manufacturers which are making power over Ethernet devices can make them to a standard and be in that range. And this will pick up that range. So in this case, our setting is picked up that it's 59 watt, just within the higher part of the range. Great. That's really, really nice. So we're almost there. We've classified against the full set of standards. We've now done a pass-fail against the 802.3 BT standard. And I've talked about a lot of things involving PoE. Okay. The next thing is, what if I'm unsure of my link budget? What if, as I said, you kept adding devices and adding devices? How close are you to the maximum of what this switch or this switch port can do? Let's just check that out now. So down here is an extra option that our technicians have put into this device, and we're just going to run a maximum draw test. And what that's going to do, roughly for a minute or so, it's going to start incrementing up by a watt to see what else can we get. So let's have a look. Will this take us a little bit further? So just bear with me. It could be almost a minute or so. And in this case, this is really, really good. We can see it didn't like it. It was saying, in this case, I don't have any more to give. And I have purposely been running this device now, and it's gotten warm, which is really, really, really fantastic to see. So once again, that shows that we don't have any more to go in that device, and we've reached our maximum limit. So I hope that helps to see how quickly that is and what a very, very simple test of an overload or a maximum draw test can do. Let's just disconnect that. And if I had a bit more time, I'd let that cool down. We could add something else. I'm just going to leave that there, okay? And we'll add in another port so that can just recover. But hopefully you can see how easy that was. So it was close to the 60. We had 59, but as soon as it went over, it just didn't like it. Okay, so let's see. We're going to pick another port. And I'm just going to go back into networking. So this is another port. So typically how PoE works is as it starts to overheat, it's got a little trip mechanism and it will just stop. And that's another example of what happens with reliability. Typically, if things get very, very hot, they've got an inbuilt cutoff and it will cut off. Okay, so this, you can see here, it's back up and running. So we haven't taken out our switch. Our switch is operational. We were just testing that port. And as you know, of course, whilst we're testing that port, just that port was affected in that manner of that test. Okay, so I hope that makes a lot of sense. And whilst we're doing this to show you this come back to life, Lee, I'm just wondering, can we just bring up our note on questions? So have you got that there? So any questions on this, we would love to hear them. So please do think about that. And we've got our live chat. Send the questions through, and we'll be at the end of this session to answer them. So you can see here, again, this poor fellow, and it is warm, it is struggling. And this is exactly what we wanted to see. So if you're unsure, this is a brilliant way of testing it. So I'm just going to go now into our load test here, settings, once again, and let's see. Yep, we've got all our standards in there, so we're testing it against a standard. Perfect, perfect, okay. And it needs time to come back online. It's back online. And so we can see we're fine to go here. So we're going to wrap up our session now. I hope that's really helpful for you to see classification, the ability to do a load test. I'm just going to go back into that setting so you can see a PoE load test and various other network tests. And then the ability, once we've done a load test, to ask a little bit more, okay? And of course, you've seen that it's not affected the switch. It's just the port that we put under the load, okay? And we're able to continue using our device if need be and do other tests against it. Right, so we're taking questions now. Thank you again for joining us. Got a question from Matthew regarding the battery life. And the thing was, the question is the battery replaceable in the SignalTEK QT Pro? Yes, so both SignalTEK models have a replaceable battery as well as a rechargeable battery. So when you're doing PoE testing, no problem, got you covered. Once again, we'd like to thank you so much for joining us today to see the amazing SignalTEK QT Pro. For those which ask questions, that's amazing. Thanks again. We'd love to hear from you, but please keep in touch and join us on the next webinar. See you again soon, and thank you.